Hello and welcome everyone to Medicaid Monday. April, your lines are muted, and we'd like to mention if you have questions for our speakers, use the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. Today's presentation is posted at pierolaw.com/resources. Just head to the Medicaid planning section and you'll find it right there. And following our program, we will ask you to fill out a survey. It'll come to you in a new browser or in tomorrow's Zoom email. And now I would like to introduce our speakers today. It is Frank Hemming, Senior Associate Attorney with Pierre O'Connor and Strauss, and Sarah Grimes from NYSARC Trust Services. Good afternoon.
All right, there we go. Thanks, Beth. I'm Frank Hemming. I'm the Senior Associate Attorney here in the Latham office for Pierre O'Connor and Strauss. To my left, your right, is Sarah Grimes, Director of Outreach and Community Services for NYSARC Trust Services. Thank you, Sarah, for coming and joining me today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Sarah is actually one of the professional contacts that I have, probably that's lasted a lot longer than most of my other ones in a lot of ways, because I remember meeting her at one of our elder law forums very early on in my legal career. So it's been very nice to have this continuing relationship between your office and ours, because as I've kind of gone up the chain, so have you. And now we get to do fun things like this. So what are we going to do today? We're going to talk about pooled trusts. And I think pooled trusts in general are one of the pieces to the Medicaid puzzle where people generally have a lot of questions, a lot of uncertainty about them. We use them all the time. We use them for various reasons. We use them for couples in some instances. We use them for individuals and others. So we're going to look a little bit at just doing a quick review on some Medicaid numbers, because this wouldn't be a Medicaid webinar if we weren't going to do numbers. We're going to do a quick case study. Then we're going to dive into pooled trusts. We're going to look at how they work. We're going to talk about how they're administered and best practices. And then we're going to talk a little bit about results and what we're actually able to accomplish when we use a pooled trust with the full bulk of our Medicaid plan. So let's jump into the numbers. So as we've said multiple times in these programs in our past months, we have good news, and that's Medicaid numbers for eligibility went up pretty substantially earlier this year. So income, if you're a single person, went up all the way to $1,697 per person, or for a single person. It's an increase of $743 from that $954 a month allowance that it was just a few short months ago back in 2022. If you're a couple at home where you both need services, then your income limit jumps up to $2,288. Again, an over $900 increase. And then for asset purposes, we also saw pretty substantial increases. So for one person, again, your asset limit is now up to $30,182. That's up from $16,800 last year, so an increase of over $13,000. If you're a couple at home where you both need services, there you have an asset limit between the two of you of $40,821. Again, up over $16,000 from where it was last year. So these are all great. It does impact your ability to use a pooled trust and how much you would use it for, and we'll dive into that as we get further along in the program. But in general, Medicaid went up, eligibility numbers went up. That's all good for people because it just gets people eligible to use the services a lot easier. So I thought when we were preparing this program that kind of the best way to illustrate what a pooled trust is, how we use it, and why we use it was actually to start with a case study. I feel like normally we hit you with a whole bunch of info, and then at the end, we kind of throw it all together with a case study. So we're throwing it on its head. We're doing a case study early this month. So here we are. So we have John. He's at home. He needs Medicaid to help with some help in his house. His wife, Mary, is also in the same house. She's healthy. She's on premises. She wants her husband to be home as long as possible. This is a very common scenario for us as we do planning and we meet with families. It also is entirely common where we started with a couple like this when they were both healthy, and now they've had one experience something of a health crisis or something where now they need help with before they didn't. So John is 85. He's got some chronic issues going on. Mary's a little younger. She's in good health, but she can't care for him entirely by herself. And the family started to private pay for some aides to come in throughout the week. Again, very common, but they can see that already the writing on the wall, the finances are starting to get a little strained, and they just know that that was not a long-term solution for them. So John applied for Medicaid. He was approved, but he told his income was too high to completely qualify for services without a spend down. So then we wanted to work in, well, then what happens, right? Because this is unfortunately common info that people receive is you can have Medicaid, you have too much money, you make too much money, your assets are good, but we have to do some income planning. So let's just quickly look at their assets. This is not why we're using the pool trust. I just thought it was not the best use of the example to completely not mention their assets at all, even though it's not really the focus of today's program. So their assets, they have a home, they have some savings, they have some IRAs, they have a car, and they have some life insurance. So again, nothing out of the blue, nothing really something that we wouldn't routinely see in a planning case. So what did they do? They created a Medicaid asset protection trust, and they threw in a whole bunch of stuff, right? Mainly, we covered the trust in, I won't say painstaking detail, but in quite a bit of detail last month. That video will shortly be posted to our website along with this one. So if you have questions about the Medicaid trust, the irrevocable trust planning, how it works, why you do it, the flexibility that comes with it, by all means, jump back to last month's, being March's Medicaid Monday, where Aaron Cotter and myself went through the trust. In this scenario, we put all the assets in a trust that would make them ineligible, mainly their house, their cash, the life insurance. But then that leaves the question, well, what about their income, right? Because they have income as well as their assets. So let's look at what we do about their income. So this is a lot of words. I'm sorry that it's such a detailed slide, but we had a lot of information we wanted to convey about this family here. So let's first focus on John. So John's monthly income, he gets Social Security, he gets a pension check every month, he gets some IRA distribution. So he's bringing in approximately $5,000 per month himself. We have to also look at Mary's income because they're married, they live in the same household. Medicaid will want to know what's going on with her just as much as with him. So she makes some money herself. She brings in $1,000 in Social Security. She brings in a pension. She brings in IRA distributions as well. So she brings collectively into the household $2,000. So all told, they bring in $7,000 to the household. So here is, and again, I don't want to dive too much into this because that's not really the focus of today's program, but we have two real options here. Option one is something I call spousal budgeting, where we routinely talk about this when we go through Medicaid numbers every year, where if you have a spouse that's in the community that's not receiving Medicaid, they have a spousal income allowance. Her income allowance for this year would be $37.15 and 50 cents. So in one budgeting scenario, we could take some of John's money, mainly $17.15.50, and switch it from John over to Mary to bring her up to that $37.15.50 number every month. And then John would have a reduced allowance of roughly $591. I know that seems like a very strange number. It comes from the difference between a one-person and a two-person household. But once we did the spousal shift over to Mary and John had his a little bit of allowance, there'd still be a remaining income of almost $2,700 that would then have to be either spent down on medical costs or paid into the local county Department of Social Services. It's not really an ideal scenario here for John or for Mary because they're essentially taking $2,700 and losing it or spending it on medical costs instead of redistributing it to better things within their household. So with that said, what's the other option? The other option is instead of opting for spousal budgeting, we can opt for pooled trust budgeting, where John is allowed to keep all of his monthly income above that $1,697 allowance. So that would leave him roughly $3,303 that would then be contributed to a pooled trust. And that's a much better scenario because then we're not spending all that down to the county or on their other medical costs. So let's have Sarah do some work here. So ultimately, what is a pooled trust? Why would you use it? So Sarah, why don't you tell everybody that's viewing what's a pooled trust?
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Frank. And thank you guys so much for welcoming me to join you. I've been sitting on the other side in the audience for the Medicaid Mondays up till this point. So it's a pleasure to be here. So a pooled trust is really the last piece of this puzzle. And that's why Frank and I work so closely, is that what we do is so attached to so many other steps, right? So you actually do apply for Medicaid and protect your assets before you are going to move forward with this pooled trust. And one of the biggest questions we get from seniors and caregivers who are planning is this legal? What if Medicaid finds out? How what happens if they figure this out? Well, it's important for everyone to know that this is entirely a legal program. It's allowable both under federal and New York State statute. Pooled trusts are used across the country by people with disabilities to protect income and assets. So there's many uses of a pooled trust, but today we're talking specifically about spending down income in order to qualify for community-based Medicaid benefits. And a pooled trust is a special type of irrevocable supplemental needs trust, which is designed for people with disabilities or qualifying adults who meet the Social Security Administration's definition of having a disability. And what's unique about these trusts, a different type of trust than the asset trust you've been working with, is that these are specifically for people with disabilities, and they're managed by a nonprofit organization. So a nonprofit is going to take management and ownership of your income and help you use it to pay things like your monthly living expenses and things that are going to allow you to afford to continue to stay at home. If John had to give up the funds, as we spoke about in the option number one with spousal budgeting, if he had to give up that money to the county or pay that towards the cost of his care, it'd be very difficult for him to continue to live at home with Mary and be able to get those services in the comfort of a community-based setting. Something that's unique about pooled trusts is that the funds are all in fact pooled into one bank account, but everybody's going to be, have their own separate account. And we're also going to have a payback provision to Medicaid. That's another important thing for people to understand, that this is the Medicaid applicant's own money going into the trust. And so the nonprofit that's managing that money if they do not retain all of it upon the death of the beneficiary, then it does need to be repaid to Medicaid. So very important for families who are using a pooled trust to submit bills regularly and spend down all of the funds during their lifetime.
Yeah, and we routinely counsel our clients that you want to have a kind of an exit strategy for the money, because as much as we want the funds to funnel in and to get used, if you're pooling continuous money up and up and up in your pool trust account, if then something unexpected happens to the Medicaid applicant where then they were to pass away, it's not saying that the money wouldn't go towards a very good purpose. In Sarah's instance, it would stay with NYSARC, who then operated the charity, who ran the pool trust and operated the charity. But if you have those things already kind of earmarked aside for expenses, then you're not putting yourself or your family at risk that money's then ultimately going to wind up benefiting the charity rather than you or the people or your house. Let's put it that way.
Sure. And we'll talk about strategies to help you do that.
Sure.
So obviously the goal here, and important thing for people to understand about just the eligibility side of things, is that it is a person with a disability, and many older adults like John might not necessarily consider himself to be disabled, but the types of things that come along with chronic health conditions, the need for assistance at home, the home care component particularly, is generally going to qualify someone to use this program. They might have to fill out some extra paperwork with the county when they apply, but they will generally be eligible for pool trust. Yeah. If you think you're not, at least approach a pool trust and talk about it.
That would generally be part of the initial Medicaid application submission if you knew that you were going to go towards using a pool trust later. So when we work with our clients and we know they're going to use a pool trust, part of our submission packet is getting some disability paperwork completed by that person's doctor and that person's family, which outlines their employment history, their education history, things like that. Because all that stuff from the medical side of things is then packaged up. It's sent to the Department of Health, where then a disability determination is then reached by the Disability Review Unit in the Department of Health in Albany. I always want to say this politely and very carefully. If you have received Social Security disability earlier in your life, then for this instance, that is a positive, because as long as we can show that you had received that disability approval early in your life, you do not have to go through that extra step of getting the Disability Review Unit in Albany doing that disability determination. So I would not like to say that having a disability is generally a positive for people, but in this case, it makes it working with a pool trust faster, because then you can just cut out one other piece that goes with the original Medicaid application and that submission. So I think we talked on everything here. Oh, and just because it's here on the right side of the slide, we also use pool trust not only in terms of just the managed long-term care program or the consumer directed personal assistance program. We also have a lot of people that are on the NHTD or TBI or OPW DVD waivers. They also are eligible to use pool trust to spend out their excess monthly income. So it doesn't really matter in a lot of respects of what ultimate Medicaid home care program you want to use. If you have excess monthly income, you can use a pool trust to help qualify for that program without spending down. So
yeah, and the key is that it's home care, not nursing home care.
Not 100%. Big distinction. Let's say it now. We hopefully may say it as the program goes along. You cannot use a pool trust if you're in a nursing. If you're in a nursing home, your income allowance is $50 minus any other health insurance premiums you pay. That's it. So as much as we love pool trusts and we use them a ton, we've used NYSARC quite often through the years. We love pool trusts. We love using them. We love being able to tell our clients that they can use them. But if you're in a facility, you cannot use one. So I guess one quick distinction too could be if you start out at home using a pooled trust and then you wind up having to essentially divert your care from home to a nursing home, then you would stop your monthly contributions to your pool trust when you get admitted to that nursing home.
Sure. And you wouldn't, not to complicate things, you wouldn't use a pool trust in a nursing home for your income, but you may use your pool trust in an institutional setting for other reasons. But again, we're not getting into that today, but that's just an important distinction for this. We're talking today about qualifying for home care or some sort of community-based long-term care, like an assisted living program, home care in your own home or home of a loved one.
So here's one of the big questions that I know that I wanted to touch on with you, Sarah. That's if we have a client and they come in and we talk to them about how good pool trusts are and why we use them and how much they're going to benefit from them. One of the big things that I know I get questions on, probably more than just about any other, is, well, what happens like to the money? Like, how does it get from me to the pool trust? So can you walk everybody through that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. It's important to know a couple of things about paying the spend down. First of all, it's not all of your income. It's a small portion, right? As we looked at, Mary and John collectively have quite a bit of income. It's a small amount of John's income that's going into the trust, and that's what the trust is managing. You're still going to get your income the way you get it now. You're going to be required to then put the amount that you're required to, which is given to you by Medicaid all the way down to the penny, into the special needs trust. And you're going to do that either by an electronic payment from your bank account. You can set that up recurring every month, or you can write a check if you so choose. But obviously the easiest is to funnel the funds in electronically each month. It does need to be paid out of the Medicaid applicant's own income in the month that income was received, which is what makes that monthly electronic deposit so helpful. You're always paying your spend down. If you can show proof of that to the local DSS, they'll often extend coverage for a significant amount of time. And that helps with that continuous continuity of care. We have people who spend down their income by paying it to Medicaid or using it towards medical bills. They have to wait until the end of the month to schedule all their doctor's appointments. It's a nightmare. So even for somebody that has medical expenses who might be paying it to the county, they could benefit from using a pool trust just for that continuous care. And then it's important to know that the pool trust doesn't then just automatically start paying your bills, right? I'll tell you that is certainly, the perspective that some people have. You are still in control of saying, I would like you to pay this bill, and you submit that bill to the trust. There's a variety of ways you do that. For a one-time payment, I want you to pay my electric bill one time, or I'm asking you to pay my rent every single month. That's something I'm going to ask you to pay automatically. So there's certain things that we can automate if it's the same amount every month, and that can be helpful. Just limit the amount of documentation that someone needs to send in. Make sure that those bills are consistently paid every single month. And then of course, your money goes in, you submit your request for what you want paid. The trust is then going to review that and remit payment to third parties for eligible expenses.
And I think another big one, just to clarify, that I think the easiest way I've always been able to keep it straight in my head is think of the pool trust as essentially just another kind of special bank account, because you don't have direct access to it. So if you put in X number of dollars every month to meet your monthly spend down, if then you don't spend all of it, then that money stays in that account, and then you make your new contribution. So if you had $500 left over, then you make your new contribution. Well, now you have that amount of money plus $500. It's just like if you had a checking or a savings account. That money just doesn't disappear. Now, that could be changing next year, because we do have rumored changes coming in 2024, where we think you may have to essentially exhaust all of your funds within a pool trust within a given month. We don't know whether that's going to happen as of now. But if we continue to have it operate as it currently is, that money, that balance just continues to roll over into your next month. So we also want to talk about some other administration rules. So Sarah, I don't want to step on you here, but I think the biggest one here that I think is just good to clarify for people is that very first top bullet there, which says that all disbursements have to be for the primary benefit of the trust beneficiary.
Yeah, and that's the big thing, right? So when people always want to know, okay, well, what can we use the money for? It's an endless list of things, right? So it's what's for that person and what's going to benefit them, enable them to live at home. So generally we're going to be paying household bills, basic living expenses for that person. But it really can be anything that's for that person's primary benefit. And it used to be sole benefit, which was a lot stricter.
Yes.
Now we have a little bit more flexibility with primary benefit. Obviously, married couple lives in a house together, we pay the full mortgage. It's going to benefit both of them, right? But it's primarily going to benefit John and John's someone that's in need of that Medicaid care. The other big thing is just considering the impact on government benefits. So we that's part of the trust role. The nonprofit is to understand the rules of Medicaid and other government benefits and understand how distributions could impact a person's eligibility. Beyond that, it's just collecting documentation. The big key thing, and we'll talk about this in the next couple of slides, is no payments out of this account to this person or to their spouse. So that's really important. We always pay third parties. We're never going to give you money to go pay your bill. We're going to pay your landlord to pay your bill, or we're going to pay your adult daughter who is your landlord, right? Or your daughter goes out and buys groceries for you, we're going to repay her. But if you're on that bank account, we can't reimburse that bank account. So that's really important, I think, rule of just the function of this particular way that people use the trust. But ultimately, again, it's important to submit requests as you receive them, bills as you have them, spend down your funds regularly. As we know, there is no requirement to spend them down every month, but the whole goal and purpose of this program is to enable you to use this money. So we're here to help you come up with creative ways to use it. And, you know, we'll talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, that's one of the
our
best
example.
parts of working with a team that they have over at NYSARC, is because I know when I've had questions about what a pool trust will do, I will call Sarah, or I will call someone like Sarah, and I will say, what do you guys think you would do if you had this given situation? They work in this area because they want to help you utilize your funds or the funds of the Medicaid applicant. So usually there is a creative solution. I know in the past we have had pool trusts actually had expenses okayed to make like vet payments, right, for their pets, because the pet was making the Medicaid person's benefit or life much substantially better. So the pool trust trustee was okay with that. So if anything, if you don't know what how a certain scenario would be handled, pick up the phone, call your caseworker, ask. Sometimes they won't be able to come up with maybe the solution you thought, but it doesn't mean they can't find another really, really good one to get you in a really, really close place.
Yeah, and I think that's an important thing to point out, is that it's always going to be case by case. I mean, certain people, we can certainly buy TVs, but certain people might not be eligible for that based on the amount of money they have in the account and the fact that we need to prioritize paying their basic living needs. So each individual, each situation is going to be handled on a case by case basis in the context of what is in the best interest of our beneficiary. And those are always going to happen as conversations with the family, not just, you know, decisions delivered down. And like you said, if there's something we can't pay, there's almost always something else that another pool of money is paying for that we could be paying for that's going to free up funds, right? So that's just, again, important to communicate with the trust and ask questions.
So let's go back to John. So we got John, he had his $33.03 a month of excess income. So with any service with a pool trust, there's going to be a small monthly fee to cover their expenses and keep their operating going. So in this instance, we estimated that his approximately monthly cost would be $213. So 303 goes in, 213 comes back out to the NYSARC in this instance to administer the trust. So that leaves John with just about $3,100 a month to actually have spent on his expenses. So what could we do with that money? So we said, let's pay his electric bill, let's pay his cable or his cell phone. If there's other home expenses like taxes, other home improvements, mortgage payments, maintenance payments, they need any new appliances. Big one here that we talk to clients about a lot is if additional care is needed because Medicaid may not be giving you all the care that you need. It's unfortunate, but we talked about that, I think, in mostly our second Medicaid Monday in February, about how we're seeing, unfortunately, that the financial piece of qualification is the easier part now. It's the actual home care piece that's harder. So if Medicaid's not giving you the amount of care that you need, or you're not done through fighting that good fight with trying to get those hours increased through fair hearing or anything like that, you can use pooled trust funds if available to pay for additional care. Last one that we put on the list was somebody working through under either a caregiver agreement or a contract. Again, routinely during the pandemic, we've seen this come up more and more, where we might have a dedicated family member that had to give up their job to help take care of mom and dad because there were no other home health aides available, and they need money to live on themselves. So we want to protect them. We want to document everything. That way, if we get audited by Medicaid in the future, if we have a 5-year look back issue come up, anything like that, if nursing home is needed, we want to make sure all our expenses are documented properly. So we actually create an agreement between that family member and the Medicaid applicant that says, I'm agreeing to work for you for X number of dollars per hour to do these services. And if there's still money left in the pool trust, then that would be something that the pool trust funds can be used to pay.
Yeah, and I think the important thing for us here is just to remember that your fees are deducted out of the amount of your spend down. You're not paying that on top of your spend down. So that's going to be something that comes out of what you were already going to be paying 100% to Medicaid. And if for some families that might be eligible for Medicare savings program, that might even, getting that benefit paid for your Part B premium might cover the cost of your pool trust. So in some instances, it might actually end up being free for you to use the pool trust, not necessarily in this scenario. But this is where I always encourage clients to start here. Figure out what you're going to have available in the pool trust approximately each month. Then you're going to be looking at all your different pools, buckets of money that you have to organize your bills in a way that makes the most sense. And we'll talk, if you can go to the next slide, about and one after, and we'll come back to this one.
Right.
So here's some just best practices. You want to pick larger bills, 1 or 2 larger bills. The process of paying a bill out of the trust is that you need to make a request, submit documentation for that request, and then wait for payment to be made. So it's important to pick consistent bills, things that are the same amount each month that you can have automated. That's going to reduce the amount of paperwork you need to send to the pool trust. It's going to reduce the amount of communication you have to have with the pool trust, right? So pick the same bills each month, generally larger vendors like your electric bill, your cable bill, we're going to be able to pay those electronically. That's going to help us pay things even faster. Think about the flow of the money. We don't get the money until maybe the 4th or the 5th of the month. To pay bills on time by their due date, we have a really short window. So just be thinking about things like that. Some of these tips on the slide are really just to help make things easier for you guys. Yes, the trust can pay for groceries, but you have to hold on to itemized receipts. Like, why use the trust for groceries if you don't have to, right? So these are just some ways to try and make it easier for you. And then if you go back to one, here's some common examples. When someone is just receiving Medicaid services, this is generally what we're going to be paying for. Basic living needs, we're going to prioritize over other quality of life things, but it really can be anything for that person. So when we talk about, what would John use it for? My first question back to the family, but well, what does John need? What are his bills? What does he like to do? What's something that's going to give him a better quality of life? What's something that's going to make him more comfortable? Are there additional therapy services he could get that aren't covered by Medicaid? Are there, medical expenses that aren't being covered? I mean, there's so many things. And of course, funeral arrangements, it's really important. A lot of people want to know about funeral. We certainly can pay for funeral, but only during someone's lifetime. Most clients who've already been working with a law firm like yours will have that set up before they get to us. But if you do not, then you can enter into an irrevocable pre-need funeral arrangement with a funeral home. You can pay your expenses ahead of time. Once your trust closes and that person dies, the trust can no longer pay funeral expenses. So it's really important if you do need to pay funeral expenses to do that before, during the beneficiary's lifetime.
No, I like Sarah said so many times, case by case basis. If it's for the Medicaid person, it's probably going to be okay. And if you have questions, that's when you pick up the phone and you call your caseworker. So we're getting right at the end of time. We don't want to go a lot over, but I know we do have quite a few questions, so I do want to get to those. So quickly, just recapping, once we kind of went through all this, what did we actually achieve here for John and Mary? We have all of his income other than that small administrative fee can actually be used toward the household expenses and not spent down. The assets we already protected, and he's on Medicaid. So with that said, next month, come back, please, for our next Medicaid Monday. We're going to be here on May the 8th. We're going to talk about nursing home, right? How that differs from home care. We're going to talk about the ins and outs. We're going to talk about the 5-year look back. We're going to offer a few options and solutions that if there was no planning done in advance, what can we do? Because the answer is there are still things that we can do. Big thing you're not going to see next month, pool trusts. You can't use a pool trust if you're in the nursing home. So you will not see Sarah next month as much as she's been so gracious with her time this month. We will not be talking about pool trusts next month.